So I am Grace Thomas, and for my FMP, I will be creating a short film in the folk horror genre. I chose it because I'm a big fan of horror, and specifically the folk horror subgenre. And I also chose it because in my previous FMP, I made a folk horror which I really enjoyed and had a lot of fun making. And I also want to improve the skills and improve the stuff that I've learned. So as the medium for my project will be film. And yeah. so yeah. So the reason as I said, the reason I chose folk horror is not only because I'm a big fan of it, but I also feel like you see a lot of short films that are in the horror genre, but not a lot in folk horror. So I think it'd be quite nice to kind of boost kind of knowledge of the genre because it's not as well known. And then for presenting my FMP, it'll be uploaded on YouTube along with all my other work, but there is a possibility that I will be able to show it at my local theatre on kind of like showing it to people, because I've got people from the theatre involved in my short film as my actors.
Okay.
So, my first piece of inspiration was a short film directed by Alexander Jeremy. I chose this film because of the stylistic aspect of it, and also the cinematography works really nicely while there's not a lot going on in the film, as there's barely any dialogue, and it's just following this one woman. And it gave the film a real look, so it didn't look kind of too staged because of the cinematography and because of the lighting. My second piece of inspiration was a folk horror film called Dreaming the Witch. I chose this one because I wanted to inform my knowledge of folk horror and what folk horror short films existed. So this is one of the ones I picked because it had quite a nice look, and it was using a lot of elements. So it's got like the kind of thorns and like a lot of nature, and it also uses American folklore, specifically for Chicago. My third piece of inspiration is the short film Coven. I chose this because it was made on a really low budget over a period of a few years, but I found it through a documentary about the filmmaker, and I chose it because it's all in black and white. It's filmed in the 90s, so it'd be nice to kind of look at previous films that were made, so less recent stuff. And the documentary itself was good to get an aspect into filmmaking and the teamwork effort of that. So it was another reason I chose it, and it's just a really good documentary. So my main piece of inspiration is the 1973 film The Wicker Man. I chose this because it is personally my favourite film, and I feel like it is a perfect representation of folk horror, being that it was one of the first three. So the first three folk horror films, which I also looked at, was Witchfinder General, released in 1963, The Blood on Satan's Claw, released in 1971, and then finally The Wicker Man in 1973. So I also chose it because of the pagan kind of message behind it, and how the folk horror is very subtle at the beginning. So it starts off and it's just a small isolated village, but then towards the end it like fully kind of becomes a folk horror film, which I really liked and I hope to replicate. So those are my four main pieces of inspiration. I also looked at directors and cinematographers. So as I mentioned earlier, I looked at this person, Alexander Jeremy. He mainly does short films using less dialogue, more kind of environment based, and more kind of creating that sense of dread, which is what I really liked and I thought was really powerful. And again, with the kind of low budget aspect, but still making the films look real and look quite intimidating. I also looked at David Lynch because I really want to aim to kind of create or replicate a sense of surrealism if I can't, but I'll still be looking at his use of colour and his use of environment, because like in Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive, those films are very like poppy and very much about the environment they're in, but they also do carry a deeper message, which I always kind of found myself attached to. So I have created a mood board of what I want, of the kind of inspirations I've looked at. So I looked at the Mari Lwyd, a bit of Welsh folklore, because I'm really, really passionate about Welsh folklore and the kind of mythology and that sort of thing. I've also looked at certain films, so I've got Midsummer, Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw, but I also looked at an episode of a TV show, Inside Number 9. This specific one was Mr. King. I chose that specific episode because the episode itself is an homage to the Wicker Man, and I thought it was really clever how the writers took a great film and just made an episode set in Wales. So I've yet to create a storyboard and a shot list, but my next step in the 2 weeks I have off for Easter will be to create my storyboard and to get right into production with the goal to film the week after Easter. And then for my time management, I have created a Gantt chart, and I've also broken the project up into weeks, so I've kind of given myself a good aspect of where I am, where I need to be, to kind of manage my time better, as I do struggle a lot with time management. So yeah, that's it. Any questions?
I need to clarify with you something. Obviously, we've chatted. So it's a complete story.
Yeah.
Okay. Time-wise, time frame, what are you aiming for?
I'm aiming for about 10 minutes, as my folk horror film last year was 7 minutes, and I know that I can achieve a 10-minute minimum time frame.
So 10 minutes, you've got actors lined up?
Yeah, got all my actors lined up already, so...
How many?
4.
Actors, props, you said?
Yeah,
some stuff?
I'm in the process of ordering my props, so I'm just waiting for those to arrive. They should be arriving.
Are you going for Mari Lwyd, or are you doing something else?
I'm doing something else. My initial inspiration was Mari Lwyd, but I found these deer masks online that are quite nice, and they kind of fitted into it a little bit.
Camera are you going to use?
I'm going to use a Black Magic.
You and everybody else this year?
If I can't get one, I'll use a GH5 Panasonic.
Right. Last year,
Yes.
we had some issues with sound.
Yes, I've fixed that.
Have you fixed it?